Did you know? Acclaim acquired the license to make South Park games before the first season of the show had even finished airing. Because the show was unproven at this point, the company acquired the license for a very small sum of money. The show quickly became popular, and by March 1998, Acclaim decided to capitalize on the show's success. One of the first publications to talk about the upcoming South Park games was CNET's GameCenter.com. Game Center reported on South Park for the Nintendo 64, which eventually released, as well as two other games that were cancelled. The first game was South Park for the Game Boy, and the other was a point-and-click adventure game titled A Week in South Park. A Week in South Park was planned to release for the PlayStation and PC, specifically so it could use CD-quality music and voice acting. It was being developed by Dreamforge Entertainment, who had previously made the award-winning point-and-click title Sanitarium. The game was reportedly puzzle-heavy and focused on using Cartman, Stan, Kyle, and Kenny cooperatively to solve problems. The game would have emulated the show's art style and have over 40 hours of gameplay across 7 episodes. A Week in South Park was apparently 15% finished during the Game Center report, but it was never mentioned again. One of Acclaim's biggest problems starting out was that they wanted their first South Park game ready for Christmas 1998, which meant South Park for the N64 had to be ready for printing in just half a year. Due to the heavy time constraints, developers couldn't create a new engine for the project and needed to use whatever they had at the time. The only viable engine they had was the Turok engine, which would also dictate the game's genre as a first-person shooter. Only Season 1 of the show was finished during this period, which limited what the team could reference. Season 1 included the episode Volcano, where Stan's Uncle Jimbo takes the boys hunting. This was the team's starting point to brainstorm ideas. They decided to make a proof of concept by creating a fast Quake mod with custom art so that they could get approval from Comedy Central. The team recorded a video of themselves as the 4 main boys, running around the playground and football field outside South Park Elementary, attacking each other with Quake weaponry and gore. They sent the video to Comedy Central expecting swift approval. However, between the time the video was sent and received, a school in Arkansas was attacked. Lead artist Peyton Duncan told DidYouKnowGaming, "Needless to say, the idea of Eric, Stan, Kyle, and Kenny jibbing each other on the playground had a completely different reaction at that point than what we originally intended." Understandably, Comedy Central did not approve the proof of concept. In the aftermath, the team scrambled to come up with a way to salvage the project. They came up with the idea of substituting firearms for mischievous gadgets and toys that the boys could hit each other with. Comedy Central and South Park creators Matt Stone and Trey Parker apparently loved the team's idea and gave them approval for the concept. Once the game was approved for full development, the team were briefed that production would be constant overtime and effectively 6 entire months of crunch. Every member of the team knew the stakes and agreed to stay. Some parts of the game were under incredible constraints, with musician Darren Mitchell finishing his score for the title in just 3 weeks. Lead designer and project manager Neil Glancy would fly constantly between the development studio in Austin, Texas, Comedy Central in New York, and Matt and Trey in Los Angeles to get feedback on the game. According to Glancy, Matt and Trey were fairly involved with the game's development, giving feedback and contributing ideas as well as their voices to the game. However, Matt and Trey have insisted they had little to do with the production of any South Park games before The Stick of Truth. This could be an effort to distance themselves from the product, influenced by their negative experience with South Park games as a whole. This theory is backed up by comments made by Trey Parker at the PlayStation 2 premiere that seemed to specifically lampoon South Park Rally. Parker said, "It's been really hard. We have no control over it, you know? And they just put these games out and it's like racing cars and all this stuff. And we're just like, that's stupid, you know?" That said, Matt and Trey have criticized the original South Park game's liberal use of turkeys in their DVD commentary of the episode Starvin' Marvin. The original South Park game was planned to have multiplayer modes such as Capture the Flag, Grudge Match, Kick the Baby, and Deathmatch, but the final game only ended up having Deathmatch. Another feature that was cut from multiplayer was a third-person camera, which was intended to let players see more of their own character. Interestingly, the game was originally going to include the character Scuzzlebutt from the Volcano episode of the show. Acclaim couldn't implement the character, however, due to the legal issues of his leg being American actor Patrick Duffy. The game also originally went by the title South Park Deeply Impacted, a name that was chosen to give an indication of the game's story and because it sounded naughty. Although the game had a troubled development, it was completed on time. Because of the strict time constraints of production, Acclaim air freighted the N64 cartridges in from Asia so that they'd be on store shelves in time for Christmas. This was expensive and unusual at the time, with most games being shipped by sea. An advertisement in Nintendo Power issue 114 reiterated that South Park would still be releasing for the Game Boy as well as the N64. Later in the same issue, Nintendo Power shared the only public screenshot of the game known to exist. The title was being developed at the same time as the N64 game by a different team, but was scrapped. As stated by Unseen64, the game was apparently canned due to Matt and Trey's beliefs about the Game Boy brand. The duo thought the Game Boy was heavily geared towards children, and that South Park wasn't a good fit for the platform due to its adult nature. Although the game was cancelled and seemed to be gone forever, a ROM dump of South Park was published online in August 2018 at the Lost Media Wiki. The game has different story elements to the N64 title, and its gameplay takes the form of a puzzle platformer. Though it never saw commercial release, the game lived on in other ways. It appears to have been repurposed into both the new adventures of Mary, Kate and Ashley in North America and Maya the Bee and her friends in Europe. The similarities between these two games are clear, but Maya the Bee in particular has a strong connection to the Game Boy prototype. Not only are all the passwords for levels the same in both games, but Maya the Bee even has leftover sprites of Kenny, Cartman, Kyle, and Stan in its data. Funnily enough, Maya the Bee was then repurposed into another Game Boy Mary, Kate and Ashley game a year later. Although the original South Park game had received mixed reviews, the first South Park game to be outright panned was South Park Rally. The game was developed by Tantalus Media, who'd made a name for themselves working on a handful of noteworthy ports for the Sega Saturn. However, it seems that single-handedly developing the Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1, and PC versions of Rally in just 7 months stretched the studio too thin. The failure of Rally hit Tantalus hard, and the studio would have to constantly work on small projects to keep themselves afloat. Tantalus's luck would eventually change as they went on to develop Twilight Princess HD for the Wii U, and help port Sonic Mania to the Nintendo Switch. Although Rally had a short development period, it has a surprising amount of cut content. All versions of the game reference unused characters. The N64 version mentions Miss Crabtree, the PlayStation game also references Chicken Lover, and the Dreamcast game mentions both characters as well as a clown. Through some modifications, all 3 of these characters are actually playable in the game's PC release, and even have some voice files attached to them. Between all versions, several unused items are also mentioned, including Fat Abbott, a football, the Triangle of Zinthar, Santa, and Ike Broflovski. Kenny's dad was also planned to drive around in a roadkill-stained truck, but this seems to have been a stage hazard cut early in development. The initial run of South Park games clearly disappointed Matt and Trey, and soured the idea of creating South Park games for them. Up until the release of the Stick of Truth, the South Park license was barely touched at all after Rally. However, this could have been very different. After Acclaim went out of business, Ubisoft picked up the license to make South Park games. They soon began looking for a development studio that could put together a prototype, and found BuzzMonkey Software. BuzzMonkey had shown test demos to Ubisoft in the past, who were impressed with BuzzMonkey's technical expertise. Ubisoft gave the team approval to start development on an open-world South Park game inspired by The Simpsons Hit and Run. The team wanted it to be more of an open-world adventure game, however, with less of a focus on vehicular missions than Hit and Run. It would have focused on puzzle solving and interactive gags that were scattered across the map. Development started in December 2004, around the same time as Season 8 of the show was wrapping up. The game was being developed for the PlayStation 2, but was also being made for Xbox, with a GameCube version planned in the future. Although the game had voice samples, Matt and Trey didn't contribute any of them, and the duo were barely aware of the game's development. Cartman, Stan, Kyle, and Kenny were all planned to be playable, as well as Chef, Randy Marsh, Gerald Broflovski, Mr. Slave, and Towley. Towards the end of development, the team experimented with having the 4 main boys in play at the same time, with the player directly controlling one of them but being able to switch to another one on the fly. Split-screen multiplayer modes were also planned and partially implemented, but the focus was on the single player during production. As the game started to come together, it became apparent that it was trying to do too much. Game developer Marshall Gores, who actually worked on the original N64 South Park game, was brought in to help refocus the project. The team tried to get things back on schedule, but less than a month later, the project was cancelled after 10 months of development. As well as a lack of focus, the project may have been cancelled due to the actions of one of the producers. Gores told VentureBeat, "I think ultimately the publisher really didn't know what they wanted it to be, and we kind of suffered from having an overactive, over-involved producer. He used to call people late at night and bug them about things and was constantly coming up with new brainstorms. I think he was trying to please several masters." Did you also know that the Casa Bonita restaurant in South Park is based on a real, almost identical venue of the same name in Colorado? Or that the episode Shin Pokemon has several hidden, lewd Easter eggs in it? For more facts, check out the new Did You Know Movies video on South Park.